31.
It feels like Saudi. It feels like the Middle East out there with spring. Okay. So let's just go around. I think this is tied to this. Right?
Ready?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Back again with the third series of this journal club / deep dive into Project Anna, where we're developing this skin-like electronic device, and we're also breaking it. We're trying to break down each paper that we're using or drawing inspiration from to build this. The first paper that I covered was just an overview on skin electronics by Nancy Louis. She's kind of pioneering in this field. Ben and others, we talked about it very much in depth, and it was really exciting to see how we are really trying to shift away from just wearable devices into something which is conforming to our skin. We're kind of evolving and going to that direction naturally, I think. And now, in the next week, the week following that, we talked about the actual materials used in picking up those signals, and that was really exciting as well. The more complicated side of our project is tuning the polymer, the bioelectric polymer, key ingredient being P.PSS, and how we could go about actually developing this in Riley Green's lab, which we luckily have now access to with Joseph Godin as our supervisor. And naturally now, our next paper will be talking about the signal processing. So how are we actually going to collect this data from the brain and process it and get something useful from it? And it's going to be another hard challenge, as we've discussed before, yes, because it's a custom BCI from scratch, essentially. We're making the chip as well, and hopefully the chip and the circuit design will be next week's discussion and topic. But we're doing it all in-house, and doing it from scratch definitely presents some challenges, which Kieran will definitely discuss today. So without further ado, I'd like to present Kieran.
Hi guys, thank you everybody for coming. Do excuse me, during this presentation I might be squinting a little bit, and just basically I was on a night out last night and I had my glasses in my pocket and I snapped them, and let's just say you didn't need an EEG to tell me how I was feeling for that. So yeah, so this is part 3 of our journal club. Yeah, and I'm going to be going over the signal processing side of Anna and how we're planning to implement machine learning and deep learning with EEG. So although I'm by no means an expert on this, so although this is a presentation, it'd be great if we made this a discussion. So no questions till the end. If you've got a question or if you want to pick me up on something, just put your hand up and we just can start talking about it. And this presentation is broadly going to follow the life cycle of what typical signal processing with EEG looks like. And throughout the presentation, I'll be referring to this paper by Wang et al., where the overall aim was to find a way to classify emotion using machine learning. A quick summary over what this paper and project was. They only had 6 participants, and they showed them all movie clips, basically. Quite strong, we've discussed this before, but quite emotionally evoking movie clips, and recorded their response, and then tried to depersonalize each EEG recording to find general features that corresponded to emotional state. So give me a quick show of hands. Is anyone unfamiliar with the Anna project right now and would like me to go over this? Hi. Oh, what's your name, by the way? Sorry? Wait, one more time. Wendy. Wendy. I'm Kieran. It's nice to meet you. Yeah, so this is part of the FONS MAD competition. So that stands for Faculty of Natural Sciences Make a Difference. And the aim of this competition is to basically make a product that we believe will benefit society. We've received funding this summer to develop it over 8 weeks. And it's basically a neurotech device that aims to commercialize and make EEG technology accessible. So currently, EEG tech is very bulky, it's cumbersome, you need to sit in a room, be very still, and it's not really, you can't really use that for everyday applications. So our idea is, this is Brishti's photo, she's expertly picturized here, is basically a forehead patch, like a sticker, with a Bluetooth module on it that will send your brainwave data to an app. And then on the back end of our app, we'll do what this talk is about, signal processing, machine learning on it to classify emotion and also log and monitor things like your stress or your focus. So That's what this slide describes here. So the forehead electrode points are called the FP1 and FP2 channels. It measures signals from your frontal lobe, and that is a key part of the brain that is responsible for, it's like an active site point for stress and mood and things like that. So that's why we believe we can shrink this device down. I do. So this has applications in things like ADHD and autism, the neurodivergent space, and people who just want to monitor how they're doing. So we all know how we're feeling, right? So, but sometimes there are certain stimuli that trigger a certain emotion and you don't really know why that happens. So for example, you could go on a walk at 5 p.m. every day and don't actually know that really calms you down, or there could be something that unknowingly stresses you. So finding a way to link time, like the time of day, to how you're feeling is could have really important applications. So here are some of the challenges in EEG monitoring. This is again taken right from Brishti's presentation last week, but I've just highlighted the key points here that signal processing aims to solve. So it's very technical, and when you look at an EEG scan, it just looks like a bunch of squiggles on a screen. And also there are motion artifacts. So anytime you blink, move a muscle, take a step, that the EEG recording will also pick that up, and sometimes on a much larger scale, because EEG is usually millivolts, microvolts, compared to steps, which could be much bigger. Currently, EEG is, in my opinion, limited by the hardware. So where that lacks, machine learning and signal processing techniques, as it evolves, is going to become, it's sort of lifting the heavy load while like hardware catches up. So a broad high-level view of what EEG signal processing does, I tried to split it up into 4 things. So filtering, so noise. You're going to hear that word a lot in this presentation. Noise is the main thing that makes EEG not great, to be honest. It's a bit naff. So signal processing, one of the main things it aims to do is remove noise. Epoching, hands up if you're familiar with machine learning or have used machine learning in studies, whatever. Yeah. So you may have heard that word in machine learning. It doesn't really mean the same thing here. It's basically splitting the EEG signal up. Just say you've recorded for 1 hour, maybe splits it up into one second bytes, and within that 1 second, it kind of basically adds a label into how you're feeling, or what the features it's extracted in that time window. And that leads me into my next point, feature extraction. So it derives useful metrics. So for example, I'll go into it later, but feature extraction is very important when we take a machine learning approach to signal processing, because the way machine learning works is you give it a bunch of data. From that data, it extracts key things about it. So for example, just say you're using machine learning algorithm to differentiate between a dog and a cat. A cat has slightly spikier ears, so that's technically a feature. Similarly, this can be applied to machine learning. So EEG signals are basically linear superpositions of lots of different waves of different frequencies. So finding the number of waves of a certain frequency, or the amplitude of waves of a certain frequency in an EEG signal, is a feature. And then that can be used to derive how you're feeling. And then smoothing as well, so stabilizing features. The paper by Wang has a really interesting way, which I don't really understand yet, but it talks about how it smooths features. So it's very, very not noisy, but fluctuates a lot. And I don't know if you guys fitted like a line of best fit to a graph or a curve to a bunch of data. That's sort of analogous to that. So basically getting something really noisy and just keeping the key sort of story the data is telling. So the first part in EEG signal processing is the most boring part, to be honest. It's pre-processing and data collection. So the first thing you do is, if you are monitoring a patient and collecting data, you basically strap it to their brain and collect it. And then you filter the signals. So do we know what alpha, beta, theta waves are? Anyone doesn't know what that is? But just in case, the different frequencies are basically labeled with Greek letters. So delta waves are 0 to 4 hertz, theta waves are 4 to 8, alpha are 8 to 12, beta are 13 to 30, and gamma are 30 plus hertz waves. So the relative level of these can determine, this is called power spectrum analysis, but that can determine how you are feeling. So one thing you can do to pre-process your data is EEG will collect other signals, which could be way beyond what you're trying to measure. So a bandpass filter can be used to pre-process that data and make sure you're not measuring anything you don't need to be doing. Notch filters as well I don't know how to perfectly describe this, but in the UK and the US, the frequency of just the mains that you're plugging your EEG into oscillates at a certain frequency. So 50 hertz in the UK, 60 hertz in the US, or vice versa. I think that's correct. And a notch filter basically says anything at 60 hertz, just get rid of it. So that's a way to make sure you're not measuring anything else. Then you epoch the data, so you segment. I described this earlier, but you basically split it up into different time intervals, and then you sort of analyze each one at a time, and then you normalize it. So this is, if we are using machine learning, the main thing you need to look at. So this is called data harmonization, just a broad term. But when you are using a machine learning model that's been trained on a bunch of other data, and you want it to give useful insights into the data you're feeding it, it needs to look the same, basically. So, for example, the analogy of the dog and cat images I talked about earlier, if the machine learning model was trained on 100 by 100 pixel images, and then you feed it a 200 by 200 pixel image of a cat or a dog, it will have no idea what's going on. So in that scenario, you'd have to shrink the image down to be 100 by 100 pixels. In a similar fashion, that's what you have to do here. So, for example, EEG has something called a sampling frequency. Usually they're 256 hertz, but making sure they are sampled at a similar frequency, and that the amplitude of the wave you're measuring, just say it's from -1 to 1 volt, you need to shrink that down so they're all the same size. And only then can the machine learning have a chance at sort of giving useful convertible insights. So some famous EEG data sets that exist, and I'll explain why I describe them later, is the deep data set. So that contains pre-extracted features. So it already tells you, for example, what the alpha power is, what the beta power is, what the entropy is. And then there's the seed4 and BCI competition4 data sets. So these contain raw EEG signals, which can be useful if you're using a neural network. So I go into more detail with this later, but sometimes you have machine learning models like neural networks, which you can just feed it the whole signal, which is sort of like just giving it an image, and it can, just from the shape of the curve or just the numbers it takes, can sort of get insights from there without you telling it, okay, these are what the features are. So digging deeper into EEG signals, what are the features we are looking for? So the typical features we extract are power spectrum. So do you guys know what Fourier transform is? So basically, a function from the time domain, turning it into a function of frequency. So how much of each frequency has built this signal. So in the paper study by Wang, they concluded that this was the best feature you can extract. It has the highest correlation between what emotion you're feeling is. But there are also others which are really useful as well. So there's a wavelet transform, which basically describes how the frequencies change over time. EEG data is very tumultuous, and it's and understanding how the frequencies change over time is also important. But I've read a few papers, and not much of the time it says wavelet transforms are the most important features. There's also I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Hjort parameters. So they measure features like activity, complexity, and mobility. So basically how quickly they change over time. Has anyone done, this is probably not the right crowd, but like options trading? Has anyone wanted to become a quant for even a second? Or they measure signals like volatility, and there are things called Greeks in options trading, which basically measures how much it changes and how complex and random the data is. And similarly, they use that in options trading to find out whether the price is going to rise or fall. It's similar here. Basically, how complex or how noisy the signal is can sometimes give you insights into how you're feeling. So, for example, when you're under load, I do. Sorry, I can't see you, but my glasses were. Oh, you missed it. How noisy the data is sometimes has a correlation to whether you're doing some stressful work under cognitive load, and when you're sleeping, the signal is much more smooth. So that's where Hjort parameters are important. And entropy as well, in a similar fashion. I'm not describing this completely well, so if anyone knows better than me, please butt in. But again, how complex the data is has a link to how you feel. So some common problems are noise. In our private meetings, I've probably chatted everyone's ear off about this, but that's my main concern in my part of the project. The noise is going to be way too much. Like Demir said, we're making a custom BCI, so we're not using one of the big dogs like OpenBCI. We're making our own thing. So that's why data harmonization is really important, making it the same shape. For example, if we're using a model that uses OpenBCI recordings, we'd have to make it look like an OpenBCI recording before we use it. but it's highly noisy. So for example, every time you move or have any other kind of stimulus that isn't an emotion, that screws up the signal. Power lines screw up the signal. Also, yeah, your brain varies over time. So just how quickly you're feeling, like how quickly your feelings change, also kind of counts as noise, and it just makes emotion classification harder. So for example, in this paper, they showed 12 different movie clips to the patients. So for example, if you're watching the Titanic and it's like the romantic scene, you're not going to feel like, oh, the whole time. You fluctuate. We're not simple beings, basically. So feature fluctuation is the next point. Similarly, you change very quickly in a small window. So that's why segmentation is quite important. So the epoching. So if you measure like 1 second intervals, you can probably feel the same for about a second. But if you're measuring 10-second intervals, if on the whole you're feeling quite sad, you could feel happy for about a second. And this makes it all harder to classify. So unstable features. So Wang et al. Use a smoothing feature to basically keep the main story. So here are the main ways of dealing with noise. I've described what the conventional techniques are and what Wang used. So the main thing is bandpass filtering. So only looking at the frequencies you really are interested in. So the Greek waves. Notch filters again, as I described. Also ground and reference electrodes. I think we're still discussing whether we're going to use that as part of our products. But for example, if you have an electrode that's attached to a part of your head which doesn't really measure brain signals very well, that can kind of create a picture of what noise looks like. And we've discussed with Joe Goding, sometimes you can sort of subtract that. It's very hard to, but subtract that from your current EEG signals. So for example, if your signal is actual emotion plus noise, and then you've got something that is just noise, very simply kind of subtract that noise and see what you have. But that requires a lot of fine tuning. And then ICA, independent component analysis. So I was in a study in this year, but every time I moved a muscle in this study, they had to remove it. So just understanding what certain features that have nothing to do with how you're feeling look like and removing them is quite important. This can be done because EEG is can be linearly separable. So when you add two signals together, they don't get entangled. You can just, if I'm feeling sad and moving my arm at the same time, those are two different ways that are added together, basically. And luckily, we can just remove that other wave if we know what it looks like. Very crudely put. In the paper by Wang, they use a linear dynamical system to smooth the function over time. So I wish I had included a picture of an EEG up here, but it looks like that, basically. And to make it look like that is what you use an LDS for. So that helps reduce sort of non-task related features. So basically just kept the overall shape and frequencies without all the fluctuations. But basically, with how this applies to our project, I'm going to see how we can use an LDS in our backend. So emotion classification. So this is how we will use machine learning or maybe possibly deep learning to figure out how you're feeling. So Wang in their paper used a support vector machine. So there are many types of just classical machine learning techniques. So there are decision trees, k-nearest neighbors, and support vector machines. Unfortunately, this support vector machine is the one they took out of my course, so I don't know much about it. They used that, and it had very good performance. And as you can see, the power spectrum features, so basically measuring the alpha power, band power, was the most important feature in figuring out how the patients were feeling. And also a linear SVM, basically linear in this means it's one of the hyperparameters inside the model. So while we have to tune our data, we also have to tune the machine learning model we're using. So anyone who's familiar with machine learning, when you're using a CNN, for example, you have things like the kernel size. So the way you determine what a picture looks like, you have a kernel size and you slide this kernel, which could be 3 by 3 pixels or 5 by 5 pixels, over your image. And then that's used to determine certain features. So how big you make your sort of magnifying glass is very important in the performance of your model. And similarly with SVMs that's used here. So we'll have to fine tune our model to also make it as good as possible. And classification, basically, it puts it through multiple layers of the machine learning model, or that's a neural network, and outputs almost probabilities of how you're feeling. So for example, these are 5. These are from inside out. If we only had 5 emotions we wanted to include in our app, it would basically just pick the one which had the highest probability. So this is kind of what interests me. What's the difference between a classical machine learning approach versus a deep learning approach? So as I said, a classical machine learning is like a decision tree, support vector machine, or a k-nearest neighbors. And if you plot it on a graph, for example, maybe number of alpha waves, a number of beta waves, those are the features. You could almost like draw a line separating different emotions, like happy or sad or focused or stressed. And the way these work is you have pre-extracted features, so things you've learned about the data, and then you give that to the model, and then it makes its decision that way. So that's good because we know what we're feeding the model. Therefore, if something goes wrong, we can actually almost figure out why it's wrong and then tweak from there. On the other hand, deep learning, which is basically neural networks, don't do that. You give it the raw EEG signal, and then in ways maybe we do understand or maybe we don't, it makes this decision. So sometimes it can have a much better performance than a classical machine learning approach, but we don't know why it's happening. In the machine learning space, this is known as a black box. And basically a bunch of mumbo jumbo happens in there, and then it comes out with something. So it means we don't really know how to fix it as well. So if I was making an executive decision right now, how would we apply this to our ANA project? I think because we want to understand things as much as possible, why things are going wrong, I'd use a classical machine learning approach. And as you can see by the previous slide, 91.8% accuracy is quite good. I think it's more than good enough for what we're trying to do. So what does this mean for ANA is the final slide. We're basically going to not reinvent the wheel, stay as close to literature as possible. And there's a typical pipeline which you have to follow. So you have to pre-process it. I think we should use a pre-trained machine learning model, which means we need to data harmonize to make it look the same as data that has been trained on, put it through a machine learning model, go through different noise smoothing techniques. So basically making a nice smooth line and remove artifacts if we can. Or so that could either be with removal techniques or make an algorithm, which basically when you are doing an overly signal producing movement, like stomping your foot or something, then just train our algorithm or teach our algorithm to just ignore that part and then make insights from a more smoother state, for example, like when you're sitting down and not moving very much. And then, yeah, so EEGNet is a very good, it's not very good, but it's the most famous machine learning model to classify emotion. And in that way, we'd have to find ways to extract features from our data and go from there. And hopefully it works very well. So this would include getting lots of data, trying over and over again, basically, because that is what machine learning is at the end of the day, in my opinion. If you're not smart enough to make an algorithm for something, just make a machine learning model, give it a bunch of yes or no questions, and just basically say, you're wrong, you're right, you're wrong, you're right. And eventually it can just do it for you without you actually figuring out how to do it. And yeah, we'll see where we go from there. Is that it? Yes, that's it. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Yeah.
So obviously we are using it's a very low number channel setup. Mm-hmm. What challenges does that present in this specific processing pipeline?
So the number of channels used in this paper was actually 62. So it's a lot. Similarly, in the paper, they did mention that they didn't need to use all the channels to get insights. So we discussed this before, but sometimes you need more than one biosignal to actually figure out how the user is feeling or what's happening to them. So the challenges we'll face is that it could give us a signal, even a clean signal, and output a response that just isn't how the user is feeling. So not too sure, to be honest. It's just harder. But as long as I think that would come with just narrowing our scope, just figuring out, trialing by ear what our product can reliably measure. So frontal lobe is really commonly associated with stress. So if we find out that we can only look at focus and stress rather than maybe if the user's feeling happy or sad, then we'll have to do that. If it turns out that it's just not very good at predicting. But I don't know. I feel like there are papers with just using FP1 and FP2 channels. So hopefully it works well. 2 to 4. We could use 4 as well. Yeah. There are 4 contact points on the forehead, so we could use 4. Yeah. Any other questions?
Good questions.
Yes. The paper you mentioned, I'm not sure if I heard it correctly or if I came too late. You mentioned that what kind of emotional states did they classify? Was it just stress and focus, or did they also measure?
No, actually, not stress and focus. This is an emotion classification. I don't think focused and stressed was one. I think it says it here in the abstract, if you find it. Changes of emotion state.
I don't think
No,
it
yeah.
has a classification.
Yeah, but I'm not too sure what emotion. I think they were just sort of. I think there were 6. I don't want to just say like happy, sad, but I don't even know if the paper mentioned, but they just said what the accuracy was. So I think they just labeled the data and just said, okay, like this is how they were feeling. But the common trope with these sort of approaches when you show movie clips to patients is you expect the movie clip to evoke an emotion, and sometimes it doesn't. So that was one of the pitfalls in the paper, and that's one of the critiques of these kind of approaches. But yeah, sorry, I couldn't really answer your question with that. Which ones they measured?
I think one of the more exciting deviations we can take with this, just because it's so much of a challenge and we're dealing with so much noise, is like using other modalities in our assessment. I think Ben and I might talk about it last week. It's not just like we're trying to paint a holistic painting, basically, of the human state. So that doesn't just come from EEG, but also from HRV, our heart rate, skin temperature.
Yeah.
And I know your project is like human reflecting, and in different ways, we can take different data and combine them to paint a proper picture of how we're feeling right now. And I'm really interested, beyond this project, stepping outside the scope of what we're making, but using a whole conjunct, like a whole table of data from heart rate, skin temperature, and more to say, okay, you're actually feeling like this right now, or like that right now, and seeing there's a pattern between the two. But yeah, that could be really good.
I was also thinking, depending on how difficult, like it turns out to be, the deep data sets, the classifications are like high arousal, low arousal. It might be easier to start with to classify like a binary, something binary like that, where like the person is aroused or not aroused.
Yes.
And then like the seed 4, I think is 4. It's like happy, sad, neutral, whatever it was. It could be like a step up, given,
Yeah.
And then if you want like the 6 or 7 fundamental emotions at the top.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there are a few philosophical frameworks in which like if you want to make an app basically saying how is this person feeling, which ones do you choose? Do you say happy, sad? What is that actually a fundamental emotion that's translated into an electrical signal? Maybe not. So that's another decision we need to make once we begin. How, if we are going to make an emotion classifier, which emotions are we going to choose? But I agree in the sense that making something binary is much more reliable. I feel like just choosing between 7 different emotions is, I don't know. I feel like it would raise some doubts. But for example, things like stress, monitoring stress, and focus, you can kind of make that a binary classification problem rather than. I know OpenBCI has this thing. I think they measure I think it's quite simple. They just measure again, like what Muse do, that alpha band power, and just basically quantify your focus on a scale from 0 to 100. But I think something binary is better, because I think users would rather have, if you guys agree, let me know, but would rather know whether they're stressed or not, whether they're stressed rather than whether they're 80% versus 90% stressed. I think just figuring out what triggers you versus what doesn't trigger. Like a trigger is a trigger. So
I mean,
something binary would be
ideal
better.
Ideal scenario can tell the different dimensions of how extreme or how severe that feeling is. Flow state focus or just normal focus, or high stress or medium stress. But realistically, the type of setup we have doesn't enable that, and it's about working backwards and then dropping off the conflict. So yeah, binary would be the best. Like you mentioned in BCI, they have like a focus widget, which is they're just measuring alpha band power. You mentioned something funny word, alpha power efficient. The focus algorithm that OpenBCI.
Yeah.
Go there, something alpha power squared or something like that. But essentially, the whole point is that there are ways to simplify the process, just binary identify if something is like someone's focusing, for example, and that would be our first master.
Then you can build upon that, like if that works, and then this stuff from the seed 4 data set works.
Yeah.
If someone is like aroused and happy, and not aroused and it's still happy, like those are all.
Oh yeah.
Like you can market that as something.
Yeah, I think it was last week we did discuss like feeling different feelings in time. We did, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, it will be like, like melting pot of stuff.
Yes, it's true.
So, yeah.
True. Yeah.
Have you thought about the conditions that could impact the EEG? Sort of mental health conditions, this kind of stuff, because obviously if you end up not with a very student population who are not only just living about their lives and they've got their genetics impacting the way they eventually think, but also drugs or medications and other things that impact the EEGs, because obviously plenty of drugs that do impact the EEG. We talked about that.
You're saying it's a question about
So
what affects the results, like the reproducibility of those.
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't thought about that. We like the whole thing in EEG is like, is there a way to depersonalize it? So whatever emotions they're feeling, can that be across the board, no matter what kind of, because everyone's neurodivergent slightly different ways. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
just Google
is where do you have something you want to add on that?
Well, one of the greatest challenges, specifically as well, kind of sucks, is that it's very, very sucks. Not reproducible at all whatsoever. EEG really sucks. It's like the most non-reproducible measurement really you can take. Because every brain's different, and I can have the exact same conditions to feel something and get different readings.
Exactly. So you could even have two schizophrenic patients with the same diagnosis experiencing it differently and EEG differently.
Yeah.
I think there is a technique, I've got a name of it, it's like FRINS. It's a study, yeah, it's
Just helps measuring blood oxygen.
yes, exactly.
More spatial.
Yeah, spatial resolution.
Yeah.
So that really quite useful.
I mean, there are different ways to get around it, but again, FNS is quite bulky set up. It's measuring like FNS. It's like infrared spectroscopy. This measures like the blood oxygenation. Weaker temporal resolution for our scope. So it's like it measures. So anyone who's not familiar with it, just measures how it reaches the brain, how much oxygen is in that kind of area. So hemodynamics.
Yeah.
But I think for our setup,
Your setup is quite specific.
yeah, exactly. No, that's true.
Just food for thought, generally. But yeah, of course.
With do you guys just have an opinion on this? So with deep learning techniques versus machine learning techniques, like classical machine learning techniques, because every brain is different, just initially you'd think that a neural network, just looking at the shape of an EEG signal, wouldn't be able to sort of classify how a user is feeling, just because everyone is different. But do you guys think that, well, this is actually a question for you actually. Oh, so what's your name, by the way? Hamad. Nice to meet you, I'm Kieran. Do you think that people, for example, on drugs, when you take features like the band power, like the different frequency spectrum, would that also affect how they're feeling?
It's possible. And in terms of what you're doing in classical, I think that's a pretty good start. Like you said very well, we can define characteristics. Obviously, there'll be some people you can't define.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good way to start. And obviously, you move on to.
Yeah, I feel like one pitfall we might have with the app is the thresholds we define. For example, for if we make focus or stress something that's binary, where do you draw the line between what is and isn't focused? And that might be different for different people. It might look different for different people. So you might be feeling completely calm, but our algorithm just says you're stressed, which actually be counterproductive. It wouldn't be helpful to have a product like that. So
Set a baseline.
Yeah.
Have some sort of setup wizard, like a digital metronome or something, tick tock, and or whatever, and then make your things relative to.
Just to say that, yeah, basically some setups have a calibration system where each user has this period of time, 20 seconds to a minute, just calibrating using your brain. And there are some cool papers on zero calibration tools, which train a huge range of data sets that have this universal baseline that kind of adapts to along the way, which is really nice. But I think in a simple case, since we're just demoing it in weeks, we're going to probably tweak it ourselves sort of for our heads. So when we wear it and present to the judges, it will work when we want it to. So last year I also worked on a focus project where like I could just literally look at something and then something would detect that I'm trying to focus it successfully with like 8% success rate. So we're trying to transfer that to this custom BCIs of open BCIs one we used last year. That's what we're going to define ourselves. Big kind of question. Yeah. What do you face?
Henry's first time.
He gives a bit of background.
So I work in, I did biological science here at the United States and moved to critical care technology. Working on the areas not really to like brain or technology, but things, mostly things like cardiac outputs. I came here to like learn more about technology. I was going to ask actually, have you thought about combining your EEG data with other sources of physiological data?
Yeah, we have talked about it.
Yeah.
So for example, like heart rate variability or just ECG monitoring. It does work hand in hand with like EEG. Basically, everything's connected basically. For our product though, I think we are just going to stick to the brain, which is, I don't know if that's objectively just less reliable, but I don't know. We marketed it as a neurotech product, so we just kind of got to keep going with it. But yeah, technically, I do think it's just like having a second opinion from a different part of your body telling you what's happening. So in my opinion, I think that would be better, but yeah, I guess we're just not doing it.
I was just reading this paper, and they're basically showing a series of different movie clips.
Yeah.
Either positive, that's supposed to either evoke a positive or negative emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately after each clip, they're asking them to basically tick box on how they felt.
Mm.
So, and they're like really well done movies. So, if I see a movie that I really hate, for example, and it's supposed to evoke positive emotion, I might not answer it how I.
Yeah, exactly. That's why these techniques are a bit naff.
Yeah.
So especially, if you've seen a movie 1,000 times, you just feel quite, I don't know, if you're neutral to an emotion, you might just feel quite neutral to it.
Yeah. Whereas if you can combine with other sources of physiological data, it might be more objective.
I agree.
Again,
I agree.
I mean, Kira and I, we discussed this for sure. Like with greatest time and scope, Apple Watch does have a health kit API where you can grab their data flow, such as HRV, blood oxygenation, and whatnot. There's more skin temperature as well, and that would definitely supplement and they go hand in hand actually. So the more data from different places of the body, the better. But yeah, which also kind of links into your project. Can you give a little introduction to yourself too?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
I'm Brett Bennett, Masters in Clinical Neuroscience, and hoping to do a PhD started at the end of the year. My project is based on looking at EEG, but using it as a reflector to human health. So looking at the tubulations that might mimic bicycles in the rest of the body. The idea is to measure all the bicycles and categorize them, get them to be the same as, like you said, cat and cat, same picture, same pixels, connect them the same line in tandem, machine learning, and trying to see if there's a correlation between like heart rate and ECG, EGG, even galvanic skin response. You can get them to come into the same wavelength eventually, and put them in tandem and see if there's reflection points, and you can then create like a way to use EEG without those biases once you categorize them. And that EEG might then tell you like how the person is doing. And so specifically I'm looking at ICU patients. My supervisor is an ICU guy, so he wants to focus just on ICU. Still exploring and developing a proposal, so we'll probably change in the next few months. But the idea is basically to use it as like a key biomarker predictor. It's not for stress or whatever, but like to predict decline. Hopefully in the future without pulling signals from the body, like you won't need pulse ox, or you won't need so whatever is causing a change in the EEG, you might not need them as a quick 2-second thing to check the EEG with like maybe a monitor or whatever. It will tell you if there's something going on in the rest of the body.
That's so cool. So would the end product just be EEG then? Just getting all these insights from EEG without help of anything else?
Yes.
So
that's the goal.
So essentially, the thing that we have problems with, some of like the effects of like ECG that affects the brain.
Yeah.
We're reading off that.
And also, like my thesis, my master's, use TMS to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of noise. Actually, my presentation, I think tomorrow is about noise and signal. It's really funny. But there's a lot of noise in like cortical motor excitability when you do TMS. So you lift the response rather than measuring the response without tampering with it. So there's a lot of noise. I did lots of experiments to determine that you can actually remove some of that noise. And that noise was from what's known in the nervous system. And it was all the signals, like, such as breathing, natural, like voluntary breathing, is causing differences in the MEPs that were being reported from the FTI. And each time someone took a breath, naturally, there was a change in signal. And if you can clean that and remove that, there is signal. It just shows that by signals across the body, they cause noise that if you can find a way to remove it, it's signal. But I've transported that project to the project. Yeah, same thing.
that's what,
It's complicated. Yes, really complicated. You start off with a really, really great idea, and then you just stuck at some point.
it's just no, it's just like you have all these waves and just there's an added layer of complexity each time. So when they're linear, which means you can like isolate it and remove it. But my question is, how do you even, like, for example, the waves that like are exuded because someone's breathing in your brain, like how do you figure out what that looks like in the first place? How do you separate that from everything else?
Yeah. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's funny you say that because it's like you know the algebra plasma?
Yeah.
Good love is that, like the brain behavior lab.
Already.
A bunch of his PhDs, both postdocs, are just they're so obsessed with just this idea of thinking analytically. Like using one thing, allowing you to basically understand other things as well. So it's really interesting. So I recommend you that. Back to the point that you had a really good idea, but then you spend like the rest of your time in this specific problem. In your case, it's just noise.
Yeah, noise literally.
Sounds good.
Interesting.
That's really cool.
Anyone else have some exciting deviations related to this?
I have a quick question. Now more people, sorry, people who were here last week, you're going to get bored of this, but I'm doing user research right now. How would you use a product like this? So to the new faces here, if you had a sticker that you could stick to your forehead and the app could tell you anything, let's just say it definitely can't, but if it could, what would you want it to say? How would you use this EEG product?
Focus, right? Like, for me, my big thing is finding a way to get into that flow state, as you mentioned. So for me personally, that's what I want. I don't care about stress so much.
Yeah.
Stress will happen in to be anyway. But focus is really important. So if there's something that tells me, oh wow, I seem to be more focused, and then I can kind of confirm it. That's good. You probably already know that you're focused into your focus. Really nice.
I think one thing that Ben mentioned last week is that he knows when you can't focus on that.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So it's like I think the utility that we're trying to derive is like not just what you feel, because some people I know who actually will go on beyond. They study for 3 hours at a stretch, and it's like it's crazy.
Yeah.
They think that that's the ideal way to study. 3 hours of stress. Even though people at a period think, and they flex as well. I study 8 hours.
Yeah.
I know you're on Instagram half the time.
Yeah.
Realistically, you're not studying that. But maybe it's just me. I study 20 minutes and extract. No, but there's some things which I feel like we are consciously aware of, and some things we're also not aware of. And I think finding that time physiologically, our body does need to. So it's about how aware and in touch we are with ourselves, so how things like that. Which is why we have that cringy one-liner, like know yourself, change your world. Something like that.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. You can also like do so as you're improving lifestyle, testing different methods, waking up earlier, waking up later, doing certain routine tasks because they're so familiar that they're low effort for your brain, then you can get into the rhythm of what you do. You can obviously use a device, whatever, to see if you're correct.
The thing is, I wonder how hard or easy you hijack that, because it could be that you're sitting in class, you're focused, but you're actually focused on a distraction.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's me every day.
That's me. The intense focusing on things unrelated.
Yeah, I guess I can't understand.
I was actually wondering about, like, what if you could use it for, like, emotional regulation? Like, what if you could use it, for instance, to, like, ensure that you're motivated? It's kind of related to focus, or, like, ensure that you move on from something you don't want to be thinking about, or, you know what I mean?
That's a good question. I mean, I read this paper about this concept of like attention residue. So when you're switching tasks, and essentially like the reason why multitasking is so bad for humans is because we don't actually, we think we switch tasks and focusing on this, actually ourself is trapped, still stuck in the previous task. All our subconscious mechanism actually still focusing on that previous thing we're working on. And eventually like asking the question, how much of it am I actually focused on this task rather than violence?
Like, I think the proper term for that as well is, like, cognitive control or cognitive inhibition.
Yes.
So, like, could you perhaps use it for that? Because I think,
When you say regulation, does that mean like
like, I just meant it as, like, an umbrella term for a lot of things, like motivation, like, or, like, what if you, I don't know, what if you're, like, still thinking about something that you don't want to be thinking about? Let's say it's an experience, you had a bad experience with someone, let's say,
yeah.
and you want to move on from that. I know that sounds like, let's not get into that. But, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I see the vision. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't want to.
One.
I'm trying to say, like, I had a lot of ideas in mind.
Yeah.
Like, not just motivation, but like, what if we could use it for all sorts of like emotional
Exactly.
uses, purposes.
What the EEG product on its own, it just gives you your brainwaves, and then there's so much you can do with that. So that's the science side of it, and then turning it into products is like the next step. So the first step is just getting insights from that, basically telling you how you're feeling. But if you link it to times in the day where you say, is there, okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just wish I didn't phrase it that way.
No, you're good. You're good. Don't worry.
Emotional regulation.
Yeah. So basically, for example, if there is a reoccurring thing that happens, so just say the app says you're stressed, you could log on the timestamp what you were doing at that point, and then I don't know, it'd be a massive iteration down the line. You could basically say, like, find kind of like ways to develop a kill switch for that device. Basically say, okay, if I'm in this state again and I'm doing this, just tell me to stop. Or like, I don't know, if it's an app, there's only so much you can do. Maybe send you a notification saying like, just lock in or something. I don't know. But yeah, it is one good thing about EEGs. I was thinking about it just now. It could be a way to sort of do experiments on yourself in a way that just maybe like in a similar way journaling helps. Every night you journal, and then you start to see common patterns in your behavior or your emotion. This could be, I don't want to say objective, but like a more scientific way of doing that. Which one's more effective? I don't know. I think currently with the state EEG is in right now, I still think journaling is a more effective way of doing that. But if you had something that kind of automated that process for you, and you don't want to write for 30 minutes at the end of every day, then that could be a really cool thing. And just like kind of keeping a diary, or if, for example, if you synced the app with your calendar, for example, and you linked events in your day to emotions, that could be a way of regulating. But then I guess the onus is still on you to basically correct that behavior, I think. But it's a really good idea. No one's actually suggested that yet. Like monitoring is the main thing. That's the baseline. That's kind of how we're marketing it, because it's not a medical product. We're not allowed to be medical products. It's going to be wrong half the time. So yeah, turning it into something like that would be cool. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, since you're just measuring like you're not actually reducing.
No.
Yeah, so it's not.
Neuromodulation. I'm a bit skeptical actually, just the neuromodulation. Just because I think the brain is so complex and you can only understand it. But like, we're going to modulate things, there are unintended consequences in that. And there are some phenomena, like, for example, if we stimulate a place where sleep creates dopamine, right? And oh, feel happy. You always use something to make us feel happy. What actually happens is our brain isn't fine chemical balance. We'll just get used to that, and that will be the new baseline. So when suddenly you're not growing that neuromodulation device, you're going to feel suddenly really demotivated and also very unhappy because you're not being stimulated and the brain adapted to that new baseline. They actually face this problem with other tool techniques. And so, I'm trying to remember. So, UCL has a really good lab, like brain control wheelchairs, and they are measuring the motor imagery. So it's motor imagery. So you imagine people moving a limb. So they move their right finger just by imagining it. They can control the wheelchair. So it's the motor cortex surrounding it, something like that, and then kind of measure the activity from there. And the brain actually adapts over time and gets stronger and stronger. So this time it's actually a good thing. Where like it's like having a sixth thumb. Where I think I talked about this last week. Where you can't conceptualize how a sixth thumb actually would imagine feel for us, right? But if you slowly have that muscle and have that extension, and slowly got used to it, you become better and better. And our brain adapts to that and becomes stronger connection in our brain. Like we're like building that muscle, mind to muscle connection as the more we do it. Our brain is just in that.
That's so cool. Is that why phantom pain happens? Yeah. If you lose your hand, you can still feel. Oh, that's so cool. Yes, Wendy.
I have something you mentioned in terms of how I would use the app. Since it, that it could be wrong, I was wondering maybe if you guys could consider like getting feedback from the app. Like let's say it says according to my brainwaves, I'm really stressed, but actually I don't feel that stressed.
I was literally thinking that during the presentation.
You could say, oh, actually I'm not that stressed. I mean, if that could adapt it to like or like for some reason you just have like stress brainwaves, you really don't feel that. And also there's the aspect that you might be in denial, you don't know yourself that well, but it's useful to adapt.
That's a cool thing. So like, for example, like you were talking about a calibration phase. So that can initially, like, because in the case that there is no objective like baseline or to tell, calibration a bit like where you like train your phone to like understand your fingerprint, like that kind of calibration. And then, yeah, additional just sort of manual correction each time. Like at the end of our plan is like at the end of the day, you check your Anna app or like after a meditation session, you check your Anna app and basically see how you're feeling. It does leave the room for like people who don't really know how they feel to do that. So but like I feel like at the same time EEG is wrong. Like it can be wrong, or the way our back end will signal process that could be wrong as well. So I do think that would be quite a good thing to have. I think, and it's better the user be wrong than the app just be wrong and just keep telling you a bunch of bullshit basically. So
it's one of those things like we were in art, we control it's all then like we train off what they say. So yes, kind of reinforcement. I'm like, oh, did we do a good job? And you're like, actually,
It doesn't have to be like every time, like just like a periodic thing.
Exactly. So we can even tweak it, like it's consistently wrong. And then say, oh, has it been reliable? It's good. Say no, yes. And somehow feeds on model to say, oh, these changes are correct. Then we tweak it like that. But the only problem is we've just discussed is like how different levels of individuals are more and less in touch with their emotions. It's my experience.
Soul dig.
But so like how we feel or how we don't feel about something, happy or sad, relaxed, stressed, burnt out. I know people who go like even at period, you go days without sleep and say, I'm not burnt out. I've seen this guy and he's like conjunctivitis, he's joking from, he's definitely burnt out. I'm telling him, brother, you're burnt out. So the people like that exist. So do you want that to be a reliable source of training on model? I don't know. So
at the same time though, everyone is different. I don't know if we've developed like for example, you had a study analogy. There's a study that says doing 45 minutes and 15-minute breaks is the optimal thing, but is that true for everybody? So even if the user, I don't think there's anything, you can't really say a user is wrong, can you? So if you keep giving the app feedback, course correcting it to kind of set baselines for you that are unique to you, I think that'd be more helpful per individual. I mean, there are people who are like like could be unhealthy, actually unhealthy, and then they
Then what kind of advantage would it provide? If we're just following what the user said, what's the point of our device? It's supposed to be listening to the body, which is not consciously recognized. That's the whole point. So if we just become an echo chamber, or if they already identify, then what's the point?
That's true.
A logging. So it is a question you have to answer. On the way. And it's a good suggestion.
Yeah, like I'm just thinking about how that would work. So, for example, if we had a feature which was binary, basically you're focused or you're not focused, and it kept saying you weren't focused when you felt really focused, and then you'd give feedback to the app saying, "Come on, like I am focused, like change." In the back end, that would basically we would have defined a baseline, and your feedback would basically lower the baseline to say when you're above this, you're focused. And then if you do that too much, which is what you were saying, you can just keep saying I'm focused, I'm focused, I'm focused, I'm focused, basically in a state of denial, and say, but then then at that point, like what's the difference between, like we have to define a baseline ourselves as a team, right? So we don't know what that baseline is, and I don't think, just off first thought, I don't think that baseline is the same for everybody. So I still think from like a utilitarian point of view, it's better for the user to define it. Do you guys agree or not? If to define their own baseline.
Emotions were like on the scale, the spectrum. So it says like we're an 8, we feel like we're a 5. And I think that would be like be less detrimental to the overall experience on the app, but also that's harder. So like if you're doing it on a binary basis, then I can see how the user input, if it's consistently just contradicting what the app is saying, could just be like owning the spectrum.
I think there are still some good sites to say that it's objective. Servers are pretty good at doing visual identifying values. So we could implement that in our app, like app code over time. We'll see.
That's very interesting. I think feedback would be a good thing to include. Yeah, we've got limited. I don't know. That's really good. Thank you for that. That was actually, no one said that before either.
Do you know how we use the app?
It's kind of like a whole place. I think the feedback thing is good, and it's good to consider how we could add value. Because you reinforce it in life. Things if it was like a really let's say version or iteration, and it's like a sticker. You could maybe use it as a parent, put it on your kid, you know, like you don't, I don't know, it's hard to read like babies. True. And it could be just like a baseline for the parent to kind of gauge how the kid is doing.
I didn't think of that. That's really neat. That's really cool. Yeah. So when you can't communicate their thoughts at all, people like that, babies, or even more not just babies, but people like, what's it called, effects? You know the condition where effects,
What do you mean?
Aphasia.
When you don't, are you talking about a condition? Like
Condition where you
something
can't
wrong with your
articulate.
Aphasia.
Aphasia.
Yeah.
Even my auntie has that, my great auntie. She can't communicate the words that she's feeling. You can see that in stress that she can't communicate why or how. So people like that, not just babies, but that's really good use case. Use case in the right case. Yeah.
Is there anything else? Anyone just want to comment on Anna? Anything with this? Anything with any other part of the project? I think next week we got Shimon and Dylan probably coming in to give a talk on the actual electrical engineering part of it, which I'll probably be there for because I know nothing about it, and it's quite important that I do. So yeah, that'll be a lot of circuit diagrams probably.
So we have like Shimon primarily working on his official team, Dylan, Jason, who's an electrical engineer, who's an he's going to be discussing like the miniaturization of the EEG circuit. It's one of the really complicated things. This is literally custom made from the ground up. Like we're trying to design a circuit, and well, it's been done before, like easy to do. So you just got to, in theory, on paper, copy what people have done already, but then integrate it and encapsulate it inside this material, this PSS, and how we tune other stuff as well. how do we actually make it sit flush with the skin, which is the whole point, and advancing your user. How are we going to do that? So he'll be discussing form factor, miniaturization, basic circuit concepts. That way it should be exciting. We need on to another version of this conversation we had as well. But, yeah.
So sorry, how long do you have to produce this? 8 weeks, 12 weeks?
8.
weeks.
So yeah, we finished on, I think we lose lab space on 22nd of August, and then it's like a presentation. So yeah, this is also like not even an MVP. I think they don't even want us to make an MVP, like a proof of concept. So our current aim is just as long as we get the circuit done with the PDOT sticker and the app does something, that's our aim right now. But then if we win the competition, I think we get more funding. Yeah, to develop it further. So 7K. So then we could add more features, look more into EEG, probably clean the signal. I anticipate the signal will be very noisy, and we won't have developed like the proper techniques I've talked about in this presentation. But just adding to that, just iterating basically.
Yeah, and there'll be a mobile app on this app store if we can develop it in time.
Yeah.
I'll let you know if we have like a little blog.
We'll get some sponsors. NordVPN, Raid Shadow Legends.
But yeah, hopefully we have a little like blog page to self promo. But yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for coming.
Hopefully you come to the next week's talk and more. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.